The first sound after my 11-year-old daughter opened her birthday gift was not laughter. It was a heavy wooden chair violently scraping across the floor as she staggered backward. A sharp, burning floral scent flooded the living room. Brooke clutched her throat, her lips already turning a terrifying shade of blue. Phillips dove across the rug, ripping the safety cap off the emergency auto-injector. My mother, Winifred, ignored her dying granddaughter. She stepped right over Brooke's convulsing body, grabbed a paper napkin, and started frantically scrubbing the inside of the wooden puzzle box. She actually whined aloud about the cost of her spilled essential oil. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat, walked straight to the wall panel, and pressed the home security button. The heavy deadbolts clicked into place. I locked her inside with her crime. 3 days before the party, the air in Phoenix felt like breathing out of a blast furnace. July in Arizona is relentless, and for a child with severe asthma like Brooke, the dry heat alone acts like an invisible razor blade. You do not take chances with her lungs. I spend 40 hours a week working as a pediatric dental hygienist. I manage child medical charts, spot physiological distress, and handle emergencies for a living. My tolerance for reckless negligence remains at absolute zero. I walked into my own kitchen after a 12-hour shift to find my mother standing by the sink. Winifred ran a highly lucrative holistic subscription business, raking in $250,000 a year by selling unregulated wellness remedies and sheer arrogance. A sharp plastic clatter echoed against the tiles. Brooke's emergency rescue inhalers sat at the bottom of the trash can, rapidly soaking up wet coffee grounds. In their place, on my clean counter, sat 3 dark glass vials of Winifred's proprietary purifying waters. I lunged for the trash. Winifred spun around and slammed her shoulder directly into my chest. The sudden impact sent me stumbling backward. My hip crashed into the sharp corner of the granite island. Blinding pain shot down my leg. I gripped the edge of the stone to keep my balance. Aunt Carol sat on my living room sofa, completely unfazed. She took a slow sip of her chamomile tea, adjusted her reading glasses, and let out a heavy, disappointed sigh. She called me ungrateful, insisting my mother was just trying to help, and demanded I stop causing unnecessary drama over a few plastic tubes. Winifred simply stepped over my injured leg. She smoothed her blonde hair, propped her smartphone against the fruit bowl, and tapped the screen. She went live right there in my kitchen. Her voice shifted into a sickly sweet pitch. She smiled into the camera lens, mocking me to her thousands of followers. She complained about her paranoid, medically brainwashed daughter poisoning her own grandchild with toxic Western chemicals. She played the tragic, misunderstood savior for an audience of strangers while I stood 3 feet away, clutching my throbbing side. When I was 9 years old, Winifred locked me in a laundry room for 3 hours because I developed a chest cold before one of her important dinner parties. She called my sickness an embarrassment that ruined her aesthetic. She broke me back then. She trained me to shrink, to apologize for taking up space, to swallow my anger to keep the peace. Standing in that sweltering kitchen, listening to her monetize my daughter's illness, the frightened little girl inside me finally died. I stared at the back of her glowing phone. The time for begging for respect was over. Arguing with a narcissist is like screaming at a brick wall. It only gives them the satisfaction of your exhaustion. My hip throbbed for days after she shoved me into the counter, serving as a constant physical reminder of my own foolishness. I stopped trying to enforce boundaries she viewed as personal insults. Instead, I built a trap tailored exactly to the dimensions of her towering, fragile ego. Winifred built her entire identity on being the smartest person in the room. I just had to give her a reason to prove it. I pulled a blank medical evaluation form from my clinic bag. I drafted a flawless, highly official pediatric respiratory report for Brooke. Across the bottom margin, I stamped it with bold, unforgiving red ink, stating her asthma markers were undetectable and she was 100% cured via aggressive Western steroid therapy. I placed the forged document right on the center of my mahogany coffee table, casually tucked under a lifestyle magazine. It was irresistible bait. Winifred stopped by the very next afternoon under the guise of dropping off party napkins. From the shadows of the hallway, her eyes locked onto the bright red stamp. Her jaw tightened instantly. Her knuckles turned white, gripping the strap of her designer purse. She hated Western medicine, but she hated being proven wrong even more. To protect her grand delusion, she would have to prove the medical document wrong in front of an audience. She would bring the most dangerous, highly concentrated trigger she owned to the party. The morning of the birthday arrived. The Arizona sun baked the pavement outside, but inside the house felt like a pressurized cabin right before a blowout. The massive 65-inch television hung black and silent against the living room wall. Winifred was fiercely addicted to her smartphone. She ran her entire fraudulent empire, her secret text threads, and her toxic smear campaigns from that single device. I grabbed my tablet from the kitchen counter. 2 quick taps and a swift swipe across the glass linked the network. The television flickered, syncing seamlessly to the hidden casting system I had configured exclusively for her phone. I masked the active connection behind a serene, looping screensaver of crashing ocean waves. The digital guillotine hung suspended right over the center of the room. It just needed her to pull the lever. The doorbell chimed. Guests flooded the entryway, bringing a wave of loud chatter and stifling summer heat. Phillips carried out the cake, his eyes scanning the room like a bodyguard on high alert. I stood near the island, watching my mother sweep into the house. She carried a polished wooden puzzle box wrapped in a heavy silver ribbon. She wore a sickeningly sweet smile, playing the perfect doting grandmother for the chatting neighbors. The facade slipped for a microsecond. Her eyes darted aggressively toward Brooke. She gripped the edges of the wooden box just a fraction too tight, her knuckles straining against the skin. The air in the room grew instantly heavy. The silver ribbon fluttered to the floor. Brooke lifted the lid of the heavy wooden puzzle box. A sharp mechanical click echoed just beneath the party music, followed instantly by the suffocating, hyper-concentrated stench of raw botanical extract. The air turned into poison. Brooke's hands flew to her throat. Her knees gave out, sending her crashing against the edge of the coffee table. Phillips hit the floor a fraction of a second later, driving the epinephrine auto-injector directly into her thigh with a sickening crunch. The wail of sirens outside grew deafening, piercing the chaotic, terrified screaming of the surrounding children. 2 paramedics burst through the heavy front door, slamming their massive trauma bags onto the hardwood. They ripped open clear plastic oxygen masks, barking clinical orders over the sheer panic tearing through the living room. Winifred backed away from the rolling stretcher. She never once looked at Brooke's blue lips. She never looked at her granddaughter's sunken, struggling chest. She looked only at her own manicured nails, her face twisted in pure, selfish terror over her online sponsorships. She pulled her smartphone from her designer purse. Her thumbs flew frantically across the glowing glass. The serene ocean waves on the massive television vanished. A stark white messaging application replaced the beach, magnified to 65 inches of blinding high definition. Winifred's live, unedited text message glowed in bold, inescapable black letters for every single guest neighbor and first responder to read. She typed that the brat was faking it, ordering her assistant to delete yesterday's post while she wiped the box clean. Total silence hit the living room like a physical blow. 24 heads pivoted slowly from the glowing television directly to the glowing phone, clutched in my mother's hand. The blood drained entirely from Winifred's face. Her narcissistic survival instinct ignited instantly. She shrieked, dropping the device onto the rug. She pointed a trembling finger straight at my face, screaming that I was insane. She shrieked to the paralyzed crowd that I was a psychotic, bitter woman orchestrating a massive cyber attack to frame my own flesh and blood. Aunt Carol shoved her way through the stunned neighbors. She lunged like a wild animal for the entertainment center, her hands frantically clawing at the thick black cables tangled behind the television. She screamed that I was tearing our sacred family apart. She clawed at the drywall, desperate to rip the power cord from the socket and bury the undeniable truth blazing right above her head. I planted my boots firmly on the hardwood floor. I stepped directly in front of the wall panel, blocking the outlet with my entire body. Aunt Carol slammed hard into my shoulder. I shoved her backward with enough force to send her crashing into the leather sofa. 2 uniformed Phoenix police officers stepped into the entryway, their hands resting heavy on their utility belts. They stared up at the massive, glowing confession on the wall. Then, they looked directly down at Winifred. The sterile walls of the hospital consultation room trapped the echo of Winifred's desperate lies. A uniformed detective read the Miranda warning from a small laminated card. Winifred sobbed, spinning a frantic story about herbal remedies, parental overreach, and grandmotherly love. My phone was already live. I leaned against the heavy wooden door frame, broadcasting her entire sniveling police confession directly to her private wellness group. Hundreds of furious comments flooded the glass screen in real time. Angry mothers demanded refunds. Sponsors publicly severed ties. Notifications multiplied by the second, systematically burning her empire to ash. 3 weeks passed. A judge stripped her of her business license and handed down strict supervised probation. The court ordered her to stay 100 yards away from my family. A rational person would have taken the mercy and retreated into the shadows. A narcissist cornered is a predator with nothing left to lose. My phone vibrated violently against the dental clinic counter. Phillips's voice cracked through the speaker. A stranger from Winifred's deranged online community had just walked into the lobby of Brooke's downtown school field trip. The woman handed the chaperones highly sophisticated, forged early dismissal papers. Winifred lost her legal rights, so she weaponized her cult. Bureaucracy kills children. I bypassed the school principal entirely. The GPS tracker synced to Brooke's smartwatch blipped on my screen. I sprinted for my heavy utility vehicle and slammed the accelerator to the floorboard. The digital dot inched slowly toward the museum parking lot exit. A faded silver sedan crept toward the ticket booth. I gripped the leather steering wheel, cranked it hard to the right, and drove my massive vehicle straight across the exit lanes. Thick rubber tires shrieked. I slammed the brakes, barricading the sedan entirely with 2 tons of solid steel. I threw my door open and charged the passenger side of the sedan. The interior lock snapped down with a sharp, heavy click. I gripped the metal door handle and yanked backward with every ounce of adrenaline flooding my veins. The plastic locking mechanism shattered. I ripped the door wide open. Brooke sat paralyzed in the passenger seat, clutching her backpack to her chest. I grabbed her arm, dragged her out onto the pavement, and shoved her securely behind me. The fanatic behind the wheel recoiled, pressing her spine flat against the driver's window. The absolute primal terror in her wide, unblinking eyes matched the violent, uncontrollable shaking of her hands. A smartphone sat mounted on the dashboard vent. Winifred's face glared from the active video call. She barked frantic, aggressive orders, demanding the proxy hit the gas. I leaned deep into the cabin. I snatched the phone from the plastic cradle and stared directly into the camera lens. Winifred's mouth snapped shut. The smug arrogance vanished from her features, replaced instantly by the hollow, sickening realization of her own doom. I smiled right into the glass lens and welcomed her to federal kidnapping. The wail of the police sirens in the museum parking lot signaled the absolute end of Winifred Carter. Federal prosecutors do not care about essential oil empires or thousands of loyal online followers. The magistrate denied her bail in exactly 4 minutes. She faced a mandatory minimum of 15 years in a federal penitentiary for conspiracy to commit kidnapping. The state froze her massive bank accounts. The government permanently dissolved her lucrative holistic business. The predator was finally caged. 3 days later, my heavy front doorbell rang. Aunt Carol stood on the porch. The arrogant, tea-sipping enabler from my kitchen was completely gone. Her face was red and swollen. She sobbed violently, clutching a crumpled paper tissue against her chest. She begged me to call the district attorney. She whimpered about forgiveness, demanding I save her sister from dying in a concrete cell simply because we shared a bloodline. I kept my face entirely expressionless. I reached into the entryway console table and grabbed a thick, heavy stack of court-stamped legal documents. I shoved the manila folder directly into her trembling hands. Aunt Carol looked down. The top sheet was a permanent, non-negotiable protection order. Right beneath Winifred's printed name, the bold black ink clearly spelled out Carol's. Her jaw dropped. The fake tears completely stopped. The boundary just expanded. I pushed the heavy oak door shut. The deadbolt slid into place with a sharp, echoing click. I left her standing alone on the hot concrete porch. The heavy wooden gavel came down in the federal courthouse 3 months later, striking the sound block with a sharp, definitive crack. Winifred Carter stood before the towering mahogany bench, completely stripped of her designer linen suits and heavy gold jewelry. She wore a standard-issue, oversized orange jumpsuit. Her dyed blonde hair hung flat and graying at the roots. The federal prosecutors struck without mercy. They presented the forged, early dismissal documents, the real-time video recordings from the museum parking lot, and the endless, meticulously documented logs of her toxic text messages. The judge stared down at her with absolute disgust. He handed down a brutal, inescapable sentence of 15 years in a federal correctional institution with zero eligibility for parole before 12 years. He continued the execution of justice. The court ordered mandatory restitution of $175,000 to cover Brooke's emergency medical expenses, her ongoing trauma therapy, and heavy punitive damages. The financial blow completely liquidated Winifred's remaining assets. Her fraudulent $250,000 holistic empire vanished into federal seizure. The government auctioned off her warehouse of essential oils and purifying waters to pay her legal debts. The community reaction struck fast. The thousands of women who used to hang on her every word in the private wellness forums turned on her overnight. Former followers exposed her private messages, flooding the internet with proof of her predatory sales tactics. The prestigious church where she used to host her lavish Sunday luncheons formally banned her from the property, scrubbing her name from every plaque and newsletter. Even Aunt Carol faced the fallout. Neighbors who once waved politely from across the street completely ignored Carol at the grocery store. The overwhelming social isolation forced Carol to pack her bags and move to a tiny, cramped apartment 2 towns over. Winifred built a kingdom on lies, manipulation, and arrogance, and the absolute truth burned it to the foundation. 9 months passed. The suffocating Arizona heat finally gave way to a cool, crisp winter morning. I walked down the concrete driveway to the mailbox, pulling out a thick stack of utility bills and glossy holiday catalogs. Hidden right in the center of the pile was a stark white envelope. A harsh black stamp from the federal prison mail system covered the top corner. Winifred's sprawling, chaotic cursive covered the cheap-lined paper inside. Even from behind bars, the toxic manipulation seeped straight through the blue ink. She wrote pages detailing her supposed failing health, complaining about the terrible prison food and the hard mattress. She wrote about how much she missed her family, spinning a pathetic, delusional narrative about being a misunderstood grandmother who only ever wanted to make Brooke stronger. She blamed the judge. She blamed the fanatic follower who drove the car, and she blamed me for failing to protect her. She demanded a visit, claiming it was her divine right as a mother to look upon the face of her child before she died alone in a concrete cell. A year ago, a letter exactly like that would have sent my heart hammering violently against my ribs. I would have spent a week locked in my bedroom, dissecting every single word, agonizing over my own guilt. I would have wondered if I owed her one final chance, terrified of being a bad daughter. Standing in the cold morning air, holding the thin, scratchy paper, a profound, quiet emptiness settled right in the center of my chest, where the sheer terror used to live. The invisible strings she used to pull were completely severed. I walked the envelope straight over to the tall blue recycling bin, dropped it inside without tearing it, and closed the heavy plastic lid. I walked back into my warm house without looking over my shoulder a single time. Inside the kitchen smelled like roasted garlic, melted butter, and fresh bread. Philip stood at the stove, flipping pancakes and laughing loudly at a terrible joke told by our next-door neighbor, Mark. Mark's wife, Elena, sat at the granite island helping Brooke paint tiny, vibrant ceramic pots for a new indoor herb garden. These were the people who actually showed up when the walls caved in. When the federal trial drained our physical energy, Elena brought hot dinners and folded our laundry. When Brooke needed a distraction from the nightmares, Mark sat on the porch and taught her how to build intricate wooden birdhouses. This is what a real chosen support system looks like. It does not demand blind obedience. It does not require you to sacrifice your sanity, your boundaries, or your child's safety just to keep a fragile peace. The air in my home finally felt breathable. We spent the entire morning eating, laughing, and sharing stories that ended in joy rather than screaming matches, slammed doors, or the silent treatment. I leaned against the doorframe and watched Brooke smile. The dark circles under her eyes were completely gone. Her shoulders rested, relaxed, and low. She was taking charge of her own health, boldly telling adults when a scent bothered her, refusing to shrink in fear of being called sensitive. Her breathing was steady, rhythmic, and incredibly strong. The dark, suffocating shadow of the narcissist was completely eradicated from her life. Look closely at the people in your life right now. Look at the relatives who constantly demand your forgiveness, but adamantly refuse to change their destructive behavior. Notice the ones who call you overly sensitive the moment you call out their cruelty. Pay attention to the family members who weaponize your past mistakes to justify their current abuse. People like Winifred Carter do not see boundaries as healthy rules to protect a relationship. They view your boundaries as personal challenges to conquer. They view your independence as a direct threat to their absolute control. And people like Aunt Carol, the silent enablers, are the oxygen that allows toxic fires to burn out of control. Enablers will watch you drown in front of them and then have the audacity to blame you for splashing water on their expensive clothes. I had to learn 3 brutal, unforgiving lessons to finally break a generational cycle of trauma. Rule number 1 is that blood is a biological fact, not a free pass for abuse. You do not owe your life, your mental peace, or your child's physical safety to someone simply because they gave you your DNA. Shared genetics do not obligate you to endure psychological torture. An abusive mother is still an abuser. Rule number 2 is that enablers are just abusers who are entirely too cowardly to throw the punch themselves. If someone demands you make peace with your tormentor just to keep the family together, they are not your family. They do not care about your healing. They are simply using you as a human shield, so they avoid dealing with the monster's wrath themselves. Rule number 3 is that true protection means you must be willing to become the villain in a toxic person's story. You have to stop caring about what the extended family thinks. You have to stop worrying about the vicious rumors they spread at church, at the grocery store, or on social media. Narcissists will always rewrite history to make themselves the victim. Let them. Your reputation among dysfunctional, broken people is absolutely meaningless compared to the quiet safety of your own home. You are allowed to walk away from people who actively hurt you. Trust is a privilege earned through consistent actions, never an entitlement owed by birth. I spent 3 decades desperately trying to earn the love of a woman who only possessed the capacity to love herself. I spent my entire youth shrinking down, folding myself into a tiny box just to fit into her twisted, chaotic reality. But the exact moment I stopped protecting her from the legal and social consequences of her own terrible choices, I found my absolute freedom. I am Karenza Johnson. I am a mother, a fierce protector, and a survivor. And I am finally free. If you are sitting in the dark right now, gripping your phone, wondering if you are crazy for wanting to cut ties with your toxic family, let this story be your sign. Look at the people holding you down. Are they actually loving you, or are they just training you to accept their abuse in silence? Tell me your story in the comments below. Let us break the cycle together.